They were here before the flood, before the kingdoms, before history as we know it. And the Bible, the most widely read book in human history, mentions them in just a handful of verses, almost as if someone wanted you to move past them quickly. But what if those verses are the most important lines ever written? What if the Nephilim weren't mythology? What if they were real? And the reason we don't talk about them is far more disturbing than the reason we should. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you read Genesis forever. If this is your first time here at Faith Compass TV, welcome. We go where most Bible channels won't. We ask the questions that make people uncomfortable, because truth doesn't need protection. It needs investigation. If you believe that too, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, so you never miss what we uncover next. And before we go any further, drop a comment below. Tell me, did you grow up hearing about the Nephilim, or is this the first time? I read every single one. Now let's go back, way back. We're talking roughly 4,000 years before Christ, somewhere in the ancient Near East, in the fertile land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. A civilization is writing down stories that had been passed from mouth to mouth for generations. And in those stories, buried in what would eventually become the Book of Genesis, there is a passage so strange, so disruptive to the neat theology of a single God and his obedient creation, that scholars have been arguing about it ever since. Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, 6 verses, that's all we get. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. That's it. No explanation, no follow-up. The text moves on to Noah almost immediately, as if the writer dropped a hand grenade and walked out of the room. But here is what that passage is really saying, once you understand the original Hebrew. The phrase sons of God, Bene Elohim, appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, exclusively to describe divine beings. Angelic beings, not men, not kings. Divine beings who, according to this text, crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. They came to earth, they took human women, and the offspring of that union, those children, were the Nephilim. The word itself, Nephilim, comes from the Hebrew root nephal, meaning to fall, the fallen ones, and they were, by every account in the ancient world, enormous. Now here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean the kind of thing that keeps biblical scholars awake at night. The Book of Genesis is not the only ancient text that talks about this, not even close. There is a book that was read, quoted, and revered by the early Jewish community. A book that was cited directly by the New Testament writer Jude and referenced by Peter. A book that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means it was considered sacred enough to be preserved, alongside Isaiah and Psalms, in the most important ancient library ever discovered. That book is the Book of Enoch. And unlike Genesis, Enoch doesn't rush past the Nephilim. It slows down, it zooms in, it gives names. According to the Book of Enoch, there were 200 divine beings called Watchers who made a pact on the summit of Mount Hermon. They swore an oath together. They would descend, they would take wives from among the daughters of men, and they would live among the humans they were supposed to be watching over. Their leader was named Semjazam, and the children born from these unions, the Nephilim, were described as giants, not metaphorically, literally, 300 cubits tall in some translations. Even the most conservative interpretations put them at a size so far beyond normal human height. The word giant barely does it justice, and they were violent. They consumed everything. They turned on humans. They turned on animals. They corrupted the world so completely that God decided to send the flood. The flood wasn't just about human sin. According to Enoch, it was about contamination. Something had entered the human bloodline that was never supposed to be there, and the only way to reset the equation was to wash it clean. This is the story that was almost erased. the Book of Enoch was eventually removed from the canon of most Christian traditions, deemed non-canonical, too strange, too detailed, too dangerous, perhaps, to the clean theology being constructed in the centuries after Christ. But it never disappeared. It survived in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church still considers it sacred scripture. It survived in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it survived in the footnotes of the New Testament in Jude verse 14, where the writer quotes Enoch directly and doesn't seem remotely embarrassed about it. So the question isn't whether the story existed. It did, across cultures, across continents, across millennia. The question is, what was it pointing to? Because this is where the Bible and the ancient texts end and the physical world begins. In 1928, Julio Tello was excavating a desert peninsula on the southern coast of Peru called Paracas. What he found there has never been fully explained. Over 300 elongated skulls, not skulls deformed by artificial head binding, a practice known to exist in ancient cultures. These skulls had cranial volumes up to 25% larger than a normal human skull. They had different structural features, a single parietal plate instead of the two that every human being on Earth is born with. They weighed more. They were built differently from the inside out. And when a geneticist named Brian Forster commissioned DNA testing on the Paracas skulls in 2018, the mitochondrial DNA results came back with something the lab had never encountered before. Mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal sample on record. The analyst wrote that the samples could not be said to be Native American, Eurasian, or any other known group. Now, I'm not here to tell you those were Nephilim skulls. I'm not making that claim. What I am telling you is that science, faced with that evidence, had no category for it, no file folder, no precedent. And that is not a small thing. Then there are the skeletal remains. The Smithsonian Institution acknowledged receiving reports of giant human skeletons from archaeological digs across North America. Reports published in major newspapers, reports filed by legitimate researchers. Skeletons measuring 7, 8, 9 feet in height, found in burial mounds, found in Nevada, found in Ohio, found in places where no giant humans were supposed to exist. And then, almost systematically, the records go quiet. The bones disappear into institutional archives. And when researchers today try to follow the paper trail, they hit walls, missing files, denied requests, or more often, the simple answer that no record of any such specimen exists. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I follow evidence. But when physical evidence of that magnitude disappears from the scientific record without explanation, the intellectually honest response is not to pretend it didn't happen, it's to ask why. In the ancient Near East, where Genesis was written, archaeologists have unearthed burial sites. These remains belong to individuals between 7 and 8 feet tall. In Hebron, the biblical city where the giants known as the Anakim lived, according to the Book of Numbers. In Bashan, the territory of Og, a king whose iron bed the Bible describes as over 13 feet long. These are not fairy tales, these are geographic locations that exist on a map. Physical excavation has produced remains that don't fit the standard human scale. And now, science is approaching this from a completely different angle. In the last 2 decades, genetic research has revealed something extraordinary about the human genome. Inside our DNA, there are sequences that don't match any known human ancestor. Scientists call them ghost lineages, genetic material from populations that left no fossil record. Nothing except a signature inside your cells right now. Denisovans, a mysterious archaic human group known almost entirely from a single finger bone and a few teeth. Yet their DNA is present in modern humans across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. A population that contributed to our genome without leaving a single full skeleton behind. And beyond the Denisovans, there are other anomalies. Sections of the human genome that researchers describe as introgression from unknown archaic populations. Unknown, that word is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Now, mainstream science does not reach for Nephilim as the explanation. Of course it doesn't. But here is what it cannot do. It cannot fully account for where those sequences came from. It cannot produce the source. It points to something ancient, something that was different from us, something that left a mark on our biology and then vanished from the record. And you tell me, isn't that exactly what the ancient texts were trying to say? Something came, something was different, something left, and we have been carrying the evidence ever since. Here is what I believe, and I want to be honest with you, because that's what this channel is built on. I believe the ancient writers of Genesis and Enoch were not making things up. I believe they were recording in the language and framework available to them, something they had either witnessed, inherited, or been told by people who had. Whether you interpret the Nephilim as literal beings, as a metaphor for corrupted spiritual power, or as the cultural memory of a hybrid population that preceded recorded history, you cannot read those texts carefully and walk away with nothing. The Bible does not waste words. Every verse in Genesis is economical, compressed, precise. 6 verses about the Nephilim, placed immediately before the flood narrative, is not an accident. It is a cause. The flood is the response to what the Nephilim represent, the corruption of the line, the breaking of the boundary between the divine and the human, the contamination that had to be addressed before the story of redemption could begin. That is not mythology. That is theology at its most radical. The idea that something ancient and powerful tried to derail the human story, and that the story continued anyway. You made it to the end of this video, which tells me something about you. You're not here for easy answers. You're here because you believe that the most important questions deserve the most serious investigation. So does this one. If this opened something in your mind, if it raised a question you can't shake, share this video with someone who needs to ask it too. And leave a comment below what you think the Nephilim really were. I want to hear your theory. The best answers I will read out in a future video. Subscribe to Faith Compass TV if you haven't already, because this is just the beginning. We are going deeper into the Watchers, into the bloodlines that survived the flood, into what the Book of Revelation says about what's coming. The next video is already on your screen. Click it. The story isn't over. It's just getting started.